What would you do if you woke up one morning and discovered that your land, your memories, your family's legacy, was no longer yours? That 35 houses had been built overnight without your permission, without your voice being heard? That's exactly what happened to Richard. To the world, he looked powerless, just one man against an entire HOA. But what no one knew was that Richard held a secret far older and far stronger than their paperwork, the dam his father had built with his own hands. And when Richard decided to open it, the land itself spoke louder than any contract. Richard had always believed that the land beneath his feet was more than just earth. It was memory, legacy, and love stitched together over generations. His father had worked these fields with nothing but his hands and his will, carving out a life that seemed simple to outsiders but carried immeasurable meaning for their family. The dam they built together, stone by stone, was more than a structure. It was a promise. His father used to tell him, "This land is ours, son. Protect it. No matter what happens, never let it be forgotten." Those words became Richard's compass in life. For years, he lived in peace. Every morning, he rose with the sun and walked the valley, his boots crunching softly against the dew-kissed grass. Birds greeted him, the river hummed in the distance, and the dam held the water steady, nourishing the soil that fed his crops. Neighbors often teased him, saying he could sell the land and become wealthy overnight. "You'd make millions, Richard," they would say. He always smiled gently and shook his head. "Money can buy anything," he replied, "except memories." But peace, he learned, is fragile. One morning, he woke to a sound he had never heard in his valley, the harsh roar of machines. It was so foreign, so violent, that he ran up the hill with panic in his chest. And there it was, bulldozers tearing into the soil, trucks unloading materials, men in hard hats planting stakes into the ground as if claiming the land as their own. A tall wooden sign had already been placed in the middle of the field. It read in bold letters, "Future site of Willow Creek Homes, a community by the HOA." Richard's heart thudded in disbelief. He stormed down the hill and shouted at the nearest worker, "What do you think you're doing? This is private property." The man barely looked up from his clipboard. "Talk to the HOA, old man. We're just doing our job." "This land is mine," Richard yelled, his voice trembling with anger and fear. But his words were drowned by the noise of drills, saws, and laughter. Frames of houses began rising that very week, cutting into the earth that once felt like an extension of himself. From that day on, Richard's mornings were no longer peaceful. The birds were silenced by hammering. The river's calm hum was lost beneath the grinding of machines. Families drove by in excitement, pointing at the half-finished homes, dreaming of their new lives. They didn't know the cost. They didn't know the history. Richard tried to stop it the only way he knew, by going directly to the HOA. He walked into their polished office, carrying nothing but his resolve. "You can't do this," he said, voice firm but breaking. "That land is mine. You're building on my property." The man behind the desk, an HOA board member in a sleek suit, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "According to the paperwork, Mr. Richard, the land has been rezoned. Everything is perfectly legal. If you have a problem, take it up with the council." Richard's hands trembled. "This is my home. My father and I built that dam with our own hands. You can't just erase that with signatures." The board member's smirk widened. "Then maybe it's time to move." Those words cut deeper than any blade. Richard walked out of the office feeling smaller than he had ever felt. At night, he sat by the dam, staring at the moon's reflection on the water. "Father," he whispered, voice breaking, "they've taken everything. I don't know what to do." But in the silence, he felt something stir. His father's voice seemed to echo through the water, faint but clear, "Protect what is yours." The construction didn't stop. 35 homes rose quickly, one after another. Driveways were paved, fences painted, families moved in. Children ran across the fields, calling it their backyard, not knowing the land had once been a man's sanctuary. Every smile, every sound of laughter, pressed heavier on Richard's heart. He had tried every legal path, but doors were slammed in his face. No one wanted to fight the HOA. To the world, Richard was just one man against a machine too big to stop. And yet he wasn't ready to surrender. One evening, standing on the hill, his eyes drifted to the dam. Silent. Waiting. An idea came to him, not out of vengeance, but out of truth. The land had been silenced, but maybe the river could speak. If the HOA had forgotten the power of nature, then perhaps it was time they were reminded. For weeks, Richard prepared in secret. He checked the gears of the dam, tested the flow of water, and studied the valley as carefully as a general before battle. He didn't want destruction, he wanted justice. He wanted them to understand that land was not just dirt to be bought and sold, it was alive. And then came the day. The morning was bright. Children laughed in driveways, families painted porches, and the HOA board inspected their perfect little community. To them, it was a victory, a shining new neighborhood built on land they claimed as their own. But Richard stood by the dam, hand resting on the cold stone, heart pounding in his chest. With one slow turn of the wheel, the gates creaked open. At first, it was only a trickle, barely noticeable. Water slipped through, weaving into the soil. But the trickle grew into a rush, and the rush became a flood. The river roared down the valley, sweeping across driveways, breaking through fences, and pouring into basements. "Mom, the yard is flooding," a child screamed. Panic erupted. Families shouted, running to save what they could. HOA officials barked orders, demanding answers, but the water kept coming, unstoppable, reclaiming the land that had been stolen. Richard watched from the hill, heart heavy yet resolute. He whispered to himself, "This land remembers." When the waters finally receded, chaos remained. Streets cracked, furniture floated, families abandoned their homes. The proud Willow Creek community was a ruin. The HOA gathered in anger. "This was sabotage," one shouted. Richard stepped forward, no longer hiding. His voice was steady. "No. This was nature. You built where you shouldn't have. You ignored the history of this land, its memory, its truth. You thought paperwork could erase it. Now you've seen the cost." Some cursed him, others looked at him with a strange respect. Investigations began, and soon the truth surfaced. The council uncovered forged documents, rushed approvals, and hidden deals. The HOA had cheated, cutting corners to seize land they had no right to. Now they were the ones facing lawsuits, their empire crumbling under the weight of their greed. Months passed, and slowly the valley healed. Grass returned where concrete had cracked. The river settled back into its calm rhythm. The abandoned houses stood as hollow reminders of arrogance. Richard cleared the debris, rebuilt the fences, and walked once more through his fields. One evening he stood at the dam, hand pressed against the cool stone. The water flowed gently, just as it always had. "We did it, Father," he whispered. "We protected it." For the first time in months, Richard felt peace. They had stolen his land, taken his peace, and tried to erase his legacy. But in the end he had kept his promise. He had protected what was his. And as the sun set over the valley, Richard breathed deeply and whispered the words that carried the weight of his journey. "They stole my land, but I took everything back.